I am so ready to kick off this program. I hope you are too. And I'd like to invite up, as I introduce them, Mark Lehmann and Andrew Sidamon-Eristoff. And let me tell you about them as they're making their way up to the floor for our fireside chat. Mark Lehmann is the CEO of Citizens JMP Securities and the president of Citizens Bank California. And Andrew Sidamon-Eristoff is the former New Jersey State Treasurer and owner of ASE Tax Policy Administration, LLC. Together, we're going to have a discussion about the economy and the impact of the recent presidential election on our economy. So please welcome Mark and Andrew, and let's kick it off. All right, I've been looking forward to this. Is my mic on? Do I have to turn? Now I'm on. Yeah, good. Thank you. Okay, great. We're all set? All right, great. So Andrew and Mike, thank you so much, Mark and Andrew, for being here this morning. And in our prep session yesterday, we couldn't get enough of what we wanted to talk about. So hopefully we can cover this in the 40, 50 minutes we have. We will have the opportunity to take some questions from the audience, so get them ready as we're getting underway. Let's start at the top. Really, where are we today relative to the economy? Because there's so many different feelings by people and what they're experiencing today. Are we in a strong position right now? Are we still in a challenging position? But what is affecting that? So give us a global view of where we stand right now, Mark, relative to the economy.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all for being here. I think if you look at the statistics and you look at what we've come through, and I'm going to keep saying through COVID because it's an important backdrop for the last 4 years, the statistics bear out the following. We have the highest growth rate of any major economy in the world, and we have the lowest inflation rate of any major economy in the world. We've gone through, like all countries, a shock to the system for the last 4 years. We're coming off a lot of issues, whether it's the zero interest rate environment, whether it's COVID, lots of things globally going on, wars, other really important issues. But I think the market has really done a good job getting through these last 4 years, I think. And there were a lot of things that were very unpredictable. But I also think, and you're seeing that in the stock market performance the last 4 weeks, we're ready for something because we've had many, many years of just this kind of gumming up of the system, figuring out what to do with interest rates, figuring out what to do with growth rates, figuring out what to do post-COVID. And I think you're going to see a lot more activity in the next couple of years. And at Citizens, we have a great perspective because we see thousands of companies. We see it every single day with people who are accessing capital and who are accessing the markets. And 25 is going to start out roaring. And as a quick backdrop, 2021 was the peak of IPOs for the market this cycle. And in 2022, we were down almost 90%. And in November, we had 0 IPOs on Wall Street, 0, which is not good for my business. And it's going to be a lot better next year.
Thank you. Andrew, take us down to New Jersey and give us the same perspective. What are we seeing here in New Jersey and the economy?
Well, I appreciate what Mark said. Frankly, with respect to New Jersey, I think the outlook is a little bit less sanguine. Let me just share a couple of data points. Many of you are familiar with the American Legislative Exchange Council. They run an annual surveying report on the economic outlook of various states, and they ranked New Jersey recently as 46th in the nation. So that's the good news. Or actually, the bad news. The good news is that New York State was 50th. So we're doing a little better than, I guess, our big neighbor to the north and the east. But there's some other some data points that I think should give everyone a bit of pause as we consider what's happened over the last year and anticipate what might happen in the future. I recently consulted the state's most recent offering statement for disclosures related to the economy. These are offering statements that have to be generated in relation to upcoming bond issuances. And if you really want to know what the state's worried about from a fiscal or economic standpoint, they make for important reading. And the state at this point acknowledges that they expect only slow growth in personal income and consumer spending for the current fiscal year. And they also acknowledge that economic growth in 23 and on into calendar 2024 was slower than the U.S. average. And in 24 so far through the second quarter, our growth rate has been slower than Pennsylvania and the U.S. as a whole, and it's slower than the U.S. as a whole in terms of our GDP as well. So, and then there are other data points that I also should share. Our unemployment has been at 4.7%, which is higher than the U.S. We have the fifth highest rate of unemployment in the country. Jobs have been kind of a mixed bag, but it seems that as of the beginning of calendar 24 through July, job growth has been slowing here in New Jersey. Payroll and unemployment or employment declined in 4 out of the first 7 months of 24. Recently, we saw in the third quarter that the private sector here in New Jersey shed about 5,300 jobs, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's an ominous trend. We're also standing out in relation to the nation. So we've slowed our job growth, or in fact lost jobs, while the nation as a whole has gained jobs during the same period. Wage and salary growth is a similar state of affairs. Wages in the first quarter of 24 rose 5%, which sounds like a good number, but was lower than New York's 6.3% and Pennsylvania's 5.4%. Personal income growth as well has ranked 27th out of the 50 states for the first and second quarter of this year. So New Jersey has some challenges.
Yeah, so this is very consistent with the results of the Business Outlook Survey. And not only is it consistent with the results of the Business Outlook Survey, which is the businesses telling us that right now, government is acknowledging it. It's also consistent with what BIA has been talking about on the policy stage for the last year plus. These are the exact data points that we've been discussing, now acknowledged by government, acknowledged maybe a little too late. We've been trying to get ahead of it, right? We try to stay 2 steps ahead. And I think if we can think about this going forward, and a bit of the trepidation we have about looking forward, how do we get ahead of that with some good, sound policy ideas that our businesses can benefit from? It's staring us in the face. The opportunities are staring us in the face. Mark, let's jump back up and talk about the election that just was. And now I'm feeling a little schizophrenic because on one side, we hear fears, tariffs, immigration, et cetera, and the impact, on business, community, and the economy. On the other side, we hear, increase in jobs and energy independence and maybe continuation of the Tax Cuts Job Act, et cetera. So there's a lot of, again, not settled understanding of what a Trump administration is going to mean for the business community, which I think when we don't have understanding, we get a little nervous. Can you shed some light for us on what you're seeing, what you're thinking, and what you're hearing?
Sure. And it's a lot. I think the peak of the Trump administration will be between now and January 20th, because it's very easy to talk about and pontificate. It's really hard to legislate, as everyone in this room knows. And I think there will be profound changes. And the real question is what kind of guardrails come up from basically his own party, because that's who's in charge. And I think there will be big, broad changes in tariffs and repercussions for people who don't cooperate, as bad as that sounds. But let's also be clear, we are energy independent in lots of ways. The state and the country's done a great job at production and really and the other really important thing is we're the innovation leader of the world. And that's a really important fact for the next few years and decades, whether it's AI, whether it's energy, whether it's, we spent the last 20, I'm 33 years on Wall Street. We've spent 30 years globalizing the economy, and deglobalization is and less regulation is going to be the theme for the next 4 years, and onshoring And it's a really important theme that's playing out right in front of our eyes, whether it's in AI, whether it's into the data center markets and all the things that are really going to power this marketplace. We're the thought leader and innovator in healthcare. There's going to be profound changes in healthcare. Drug discovery is accelerating. We're going to cure lots of diseases that seemed incurable. But the regulatory backdrop is really important, and the tax backdrop is really important. There's a lot of euphoria on Wall Street. You're watching your 401ks go up a lot in the last 4 weeks, and that feels really good, I'm sure. But there's always something lurking around the corner. We were talking about that earlier today. I've been in banking for 30 years. I live in California, watching SVB and First Republic and Signature Bank fail in March of last year. And the speed and the way it happened was so profound. And we do a great job legislating the last crisis in banking and in other sectors. And there's always something lurking around. And my fear is that with this sort of euphoria, the Russell 2000 was up 10% in November. That's a big move. Is that we're getting a little euphoric and we're not really looking at what has to happen with some guardrails. And it'll be really interesting to watch what the party does. We've already seen a couple of the nominees kind of filter back. The people who seem outside of anybody's comfort zone, we'll probably see more of that. But it's going to be really interesting to watch. Another thing to watch is 2026. There's 33 senators up for re-election. We all know that. 20 of them are Republicans. So that's coming around the corner. And so I'm optimistic because of what's been put in place the last 4 years. The Jobs Act, Build Back Better, some of the onshoring, some of the pressures globally, some of the fears of China, which are real, have made the U.S. the best place to create. And I think that's really an important backdrop, but we got to make sure that that continues.
So as the innovation country, that's wonderful. We love to say in New Jersey, we were the original innovation state, though we feel we've lost our way on that some bit. In fact, our vision at NJBIA is to see New Jersey reclaim its stature as the innovation state, and that's what we strive for each and every day in everything that we do. So Andrew, taking it down to the state now, what is the impact of things like tariffs, for example, on New Jersey manufacturers, a big segment of our community and our pharmaceuticals, et cetera?
So once again, I'm going to be a bit of a gloomy voice. I'm focused on risk. I hope that's not inappropriate. First, with respect to tariffs, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone in this room to be told that, New Jersey is is very much a part of the global economy. And 1.2 million jobs here in New Jersey are connected to international trade. That's 1 in 5 jobs here. We've got 20,000 companies in New Jersey who are exporting. So any talk of tariffs is very, very serious. And it could be a negotiating posture, or it could be very serious. And we don't know yet whether the Trump administration will follow through. What we do know, however, and this is, I think, of immediate importance to the New Jersey business community, is that during his first administration, the Trump administration granted tens of thousands of individual exemptions from tariffs to individual companies. And that was a very important component of his first term and tariff policy, because it allowed many companies to escape some of the most feared consequences of tariffs on steel, for instance, and aluminum and that kind of thing. So here in New Jersey, I think it may be appropriate for companies to begin to think of how tariffs, as currently being discussed by the Trump team, how will they impact companies here in New Jersey, which are part of international trade, but also what specific exemptions would be appropriate and or necessary in order to make sure that New Jersey companies remain competitive going forward. I think that has to be a project of the highest priority even if in the end some of these tariffs aren't imposed. The second thing I wanted to just touch on in this space is the expiration of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the 2017 Trump tax cuts. All of you are familiar with, the debate over the state and local tax deduction, the possibility of corporate rates going up if nothing is done to preserve those tax cuts. There's another segment of this legislation that I think will also impact New Jersey to a high degree because of our engagement in the global economy, and that is the provisions of the TCJA that touched on international taxation. If nothing is done at the end of 2025, taxes on companies with income derived from worldwide sources, including income from intangible assets, patents, other things like that, will go up quite dramatically, about 20%, if they aren't extended. And that could have a tremendous impact on, say, our major industries in pharma and elsewhere that are heavily involved in research and monetizing intellectual property. So that's something to worry about. And you may have heard of the acronyms out there, GILTI or BEAT or FDII. I won't go into it because I frankly don't understand it all, but I do know that I understand enough to know this is a big, big, big deal for New Jersey in particular.
And then just to finish out this part, just 2 minutes on immigration. Here in New Jersey, we have very large numbers, HB1 workers that support those exact industries we were just talking about. And then seasonal, we have J1 visa workers who come in, et cetera. Theirs is different. They come, they go. The HB1s are here, longer, et cetera. We also have many students who come and study here in the brain trust that is our NJITs and higher institutions of education here in New Jersey, brain trusts that maybe these companies want to then capture back. And we are one of the largest visa states in the nation. I think only, if I recall correctly, Chris gave me some stats last night, behind California and Texas. And New York and Virginia are very close to us in this space. Figures East Coast, right? Northeast. So what is the impact or concerns around discussions of mass deportation? And what should we be thinking about as a business community in that space? You want to start, Andrew, and then Mark, I'll ask you to come.
Well, I'm no expert in demographics or immigration, but I instinctively I look at the fact that we have a relatively high percentage of foreign-born residents in this state, and we also have a very high degree of educational attainment in this state. So it seems to me that any policy that risks losing a lot of our talent is going to have a negative impact on the state and its competitiveness. And then, of course, there's the collateral issue of lower wage earners who support service industries. None, but I think for New Jersey, again, the New Jersey nuance, if you will, is the fact that we had so many knowledge workers, and many of them are new Americans or new residents.
We heard numbers of 15 million people being deported during the last year. That's not going to happen. I think there will be definitely some communities that are disaffected disproportionately, retribution type things we saw in the first administration. But to think that our fields are not going to be picked by some of the laborers who've been doing it for the last generation and more, and some of the unskilled workers who are really, make our beds and do things in hotels, et cetera. If that whole complex goes away, it's not going to happen. But there will be profound repercussions, I think, from those policies. And I think his electorate wants it. And I think there will be good people and bad people. And I think he does a very good job of making that loud and clear to people. And and I don't mean that as a compliment. I mean that as he's not unclear. So when people say, "Oh my God, I never saw this coming," and we had one yesterday, right? And just in the neighboring state of Pennsylvania, where he came out and said, "I'm against the U.S. Steel merger," and the U.S. Steel merger, somebody from that company spoke and on his behalf, and kind of looked in the camera yesterday and said, "How did this happen?" And that's should be wildly unsurprising to a lot of people, but this is going to happen. Like I said, I think the next 7 weeks will be the crescendo, the highest moment of optimism for everything kind of working out. And not everything's going to work out, but I do think he will follow through on some of that. But to think that those daunting numbers, those are not going to come true.
Thank you. So bringing it now to the issues that I was speaking earlier, affordability, which majorly impacts regional competitiveness, for particularly here in the state of New Jersey, spending and taxes. Spending, we do too much of it. Taxes, we do too much of it. Right. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about, and Andrew, we'll start on the spending because I know this is really important to you relative to where we are from a budget deficit and what that means relative to future revenue, as well as where's Walter Brash? Debt, Walter, right? Yes. Walter loves studying debt in the state. So these are significant issues because we really are facing the fiscal cliff. We saw the governor just sent out an edict to his administration saying find 5% of savings and freeze spending right now. The things we were warning about as we sat here literally a year ago at this conference, and we had a panel of economists talk about the fiscal cliff is upon us. Well, it is upon us. So how do we address the spending first? What do we do in that space? Because we can't tax our way out of this anymore.
I think first we have to be honest about the challenge ahead of us. And let me again share some data points. The current budget for New Jersey, which is just south of $57 billion, is up 8.2% from the previous fiscal year. And it's up, spending is up 57% since fiscal 2018. So that's a lot. And I think that well exceeds the rate of inflation, as suggests that much of this new spending will be unsustainable. Much has been said about a structural deficit here in New Jersey. The administration has acknowledged that it's drawn down about $2 billion from the budget surplus in order to balance the books for the current fiscal year. Actually, the number, as disclosed in the bond disclosure document that I referenced a moment ago, is closer to $2.4 billion. But the real structural deficit, many of us calculate at north of $4.5 billion. And that's because the state has been using resources that won't be available in the future. For instance, many of you are painfully aware of the imposition of a surcharge on corporations going forward. That has been rated in the current fiscal year, and then will come online next year to support transit. But
Well, we'll see if it's going to go to support transit, won't we?
indeed, yes. And but there's another, the Stay New Jersey program that you referenced a moment ago, which is the new shiny new property tax relief package that the legislature and the governor adopted. That will require an increased appropriation of about $1.3 billion over the next couple of fiscal years. So if you add it all together, we're looking at a structural deficit north of $4.5 billion, which is a lot of money by any measure. So I'm worried that the state is just not, announcing a 5% trim in the current fiscal year is just window dressing. It's just a talking point because I think there are larger issues afoot. And the next governor, who may well attend this conference here today, will probably be presented with a very serious set of challenges.
Absolutely. Mark, do you want to offer anything on?
Yeah, I live in a high tax cost state as well, California. So I'm very, as my mother-in-law would say, I hear you, I feel you. So we also have a deficit, a profound deficit. Gavin Newsom, last week, we're holding a special session right now in our state to work on some of the social issues that are going to magnify in the next 4 years. But getting back to the economics, I mean, one of the edicts of the Trump administration is the size of government. You look at some of these agencies, if you will, with Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency, and, the theme of there's too much government is going to pound out for the next 4 years. We're going to hear that left and right. And whether it's national or local, that's what's going to happen. And we have a new mayor in my city, San Francisco, who that's the issue he's talking about. There's too many agencies, there's too much excess, there's too much this, there's too much that. And that's going to be a really profound issue across the country and across the states and across the local economies. And I think it's really important. We were talking before, Andrew and I were talking about government and government doing good and government doing well. At the same time, everybody complains about there's too much this and too much regulation and too much taxes and too much impediments to getting things done, except when there's a crisis. And where was the government when I needed them? So it's a very delicate line to walk. It's something we all have talked about and thought about. But I do think, I keep saying this, there will be profound changes that will filter down from the federal government down to the states, because both socially and politically, as well as economically, things will change.
And the challenge will be how those changes impact a high tax, high cost state like the state of New Jersey. Speaking of taxes, the highest tax state in the nation by far in too many areas, right? When we do our annual competitive ranking for the region at NJBIA, we look at property tax, income tax, sales tax, corporate business tax, a few other factors too, but we put them all together. We're the highest, if not among the 4 top highest in any single one of those. What is the impact of taxes on economy? And what can we do? I mean, we say, oh, let's lower taxes. I don't know how practical that is. It's easy to say, not easy to accomplish. But, in this space, what do we do to have taxes be more friendly so that we could have better affordability in New Jersey? Andrew, you want to start?
Well, that's a huge question.
Perennial question.
So I think number one is you want stability in your public policy, whether it's taxes or spending or regulation. And the repurposing and extension of the corporate tax surcharge, it's a prime example of how not to manage a state level tax policy, because I feel that it really singled out New Jersey as an unreliable public policy partner for the business community, and signal to the rest of the country, if not the world, that New Jersey is less competitive and unwilling to stick by its commitments. And I think I wrote a paper on this that some of you may have seen published, and I think I pointed out that in Virginia, for instance, their corporate tax rate has been stable since the 1980s, I believe, if not earlier. Whereas you couldn't say that about New York or New Jersey or Connecticut, most of our competitive, regionally competitive states. So stability is number one. And the other, factor I would put in terms of tax policy is to recognize that state level tax policy is part of a mix of public policies that do impact migration, not only with respect to individuals and families, but also businesses over time. And the key is that modifier over time, because I think taxes are an important factor at the margin of the economic decision-making over long periods of time. And we've seen that here over decades. For instance, both New Jersey and New York have seen a increase in the number or proportion of high earners who are filing as non-residents as opposed to residents. That tells you a lot about what's going on. We have also, for quite a long time, not made as many new income millionaires as the national average. So, you'll read stories in which, advocate groups who want more taxes say, well, we have more millionaires now than we did before we put on the surcharge. Well, that's great. Yes, it's true, but we don't have as many as we could or should have. And, at one point when I was still in office, which is now 1,000 years ago, I asked staff to do just a rough back of the envelope model of how much extra revenue we would have had we grown our millionaire filer population at the national average. And it came out to just short of $1 billion a year in gross income tax revenue. So that I think speaks to the real impact of tax policy at the state level.
Let's get the mics ready because we're coming to Q&A. I can't help but just on the out-migration, throw out one of those NJBIA stats because we update these numbers every year from Tax Foundation and census data. So over the last 15 years, $35 billion adjusted gross income leaving the state of New Jersey. $35 billion. 2022 alone, over $5 billion. So somebody maybe wants to say, 15 years, average that out. 2022 over $5 billion. That's recent. Right? That's money leaving the state of New Jersey that is otherwise not just not taxed here, it's not spent here. It's not spent at your companies buying your products and your services. It's spent somewhere else. All right, let's get some questions from the audience. And these lights are pretty bright, so if someone can let us know. But raise your hand. We have mics floating around. Wave, because I know you got to have a question for these gentlemen, or else I'm going to bring on some more.
Here we go.
Okay. And please say who you are and your company. Oh, I know who you are, Hen.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Audrey Lane. I'm with Garden State Initiative. Thank you both for your insight. It's, I'm not going to say reassuring, it just reaffirms what a lot of us have been saying. My question is directed at you, Andrew. I'm wondering if you had a magic wand and can start to make a couple of changes, maybe what would be the top 1 or 2 policy changes you'd like to see in the next administration to help the economy and economic growth?
Well, okay. So number one would be to adopt a framework that emphasizes stability in our public policy, specifically tax policy. So that would be number one. And if I had a magic wand, I would be working with the business community to basically structure that going forward. Beyond that, I think that what needs to happen in this state is we need to take a serious look at our cost structure. And this will actually be quite painful if it's done correctly and comprehensively, because there's so much about New Jersey's affordability problem that is really embedded in the way we organize our communities and the way we do our local politics as well as our state politics. New Jersey is a target-rich environment for basically wasteful practices at the local and at the state level. I'll give you one example that really gives me, it makes me, upset, and you'll probably laugh. But as a refugee from New York State, I can tell you there is no other state that I've ever been to that has this ridiculous practice of assigning not 1, but 2 police cars and officers to monitor traffic safety at every utility project in the state, regardless of whether there is a true, traffic safety issue. This is a local practice that costs ratepayers, i.e. taxpayers, a lot of money over time. And no one wants to get into this. I actually filed an OPRA with the borough of Princeton a couple of years ago, and it took an extremely long time for me to get a straight answer about this. But what happens, just to kind of tell you what's going on here. So the utility companies are okay with this because they just pass on the cost to ratepayers. The localities are okay with it because they set the rates that they charge the utilities for assigning police officers to monitor traffic. But they set those rates at a senior officer level. But of course, they assign junior officers to the details. So they make money. They say they, quote unquote, save taxpayers money. But of course, they're not saving taxpayers money because last time I checked, I'm both a taxpayer and a ratepayer. So it's pretty irksome. And then beyond that, the police unions love it because this justifies higher headcount and overtime. So it's a symbiosis that permeates the system. It's just one not so small example of the culture of New Jersey that is antithetical to affordability. And that has to be addressed, both within and outside government.
Mark, anything that you can offer in response to?
No, I mean, I think you make a really good, but I really do believe the next 4 years, the size of government and the number of agencies and the repetition for job descriptions are going to go down, and it's going to be painful because, right, the unions and the embedded, the annualization of this is embedded in all of our economies, and something we've seen. We could have sat up here 20 years ago and said the same thing. So ripping off that Band-Aid and really doing something very difficult is really hard. And it's like, what I always say, it's like parenting. It's like with a colleague, nobody says, I wish I would have waited another 6 months.
I guess my point is that, everyone in New Jersey seems to have an angle of some kind, right?
It's a Jersey thing.
It's a Jersey thing, maybe. But the point is that if you're really going to get your arms around affordability in New Jersey, you have to examine yourself and your own cultural space, as well as everybody else. It's your problem, not everyone else's problem.
Yeah, that is so true. I have to share an example that made me crazy years ago, right? I served on my school board for a very, very long time, and we do the coffee clutches around budget time. And so we're talking about how can we save money in the district. And this was in my own neighborhood, hosting in my own living room, right? And one of my neighbors said, well, you know what? I think we can go back to part-time kindergarten because we had full-time kindergarten in Robbinsville. So I said, you do understand though, that's like the articulation, K through, that's where it all happens, right? And if you kind of don't get enough in kindergarten, you're not going to get there. I said, so what, and how old is your child? Oh, my kid's in 4th grade. Okay. So to your point of like owning your own space, right? It's like, what do we all want everything in our own little way, in our own little bubble, but we complain about having to pay for it. And I think we need reconciliation all around to have honest, transparent discussions. Do we have another question? Again, I have some bright lights, so. Oh, Cliff has a question up here. Mm-hmm. The mic is coming. Thank you, Randy. Yeah, I can't see this.
Thanks again for the conversation. Cliff Lindholm, I chair NJBIA, and I also run a manufacturing company here in New Jersey. So my question in my own space is, what one or two things would you recommend to change or improve upon either nationally or locally to help support and improve the business environment for manufacturing companies specifically, knowing that nationally, we've got challenges, and certainly locally here in the state, we've got challenges. What are a couple things that could be changed or done to help promote that important part of the economy?
I think post-crisis, post-March of last year, a lot of the regulation about how much banks lending they can do, or what kind of lending they could do, what kind of reserves they need to have. A lot of talk was about how much more we needed to have. I think that will temper coming up, and I think that backdrop will be very helpful. I think the best banks, include yours, are really good at self-regulating, and we need regulate. I want to be clear here to this room. I am not against all regulation. I said it earlier. We all want less regulation until we say we're the regulators. If you were a Silicon Valley Bank shareholder or a Signature Bank shareholder, you screamed and cried and said, we're the regulators. But I think there are important things that we can do to make the environment more friendly to the kind of lending we want to get done, the kind of lending standards we have, the kind of ratios that we need to have within our bank. And I think that will get eased coming up in 25 and beyond. Some of the biggest backdrops that would have been very painful, I think, will not happen. That's the first thing. The second thing is I think this is going to happen anyway, is I think that there was a lot of fear in the marketplace about where are rates going and how worried are we that we're going to, I mean, have we heard the hard landing talk in the last 6 months? I haven't. Have we heard the recession talk in the last 6 months? We certainly haven't. So I think that will help a lot. I think by getting that word out, if you will, I think that will be very profound for the business banking background. I think there's going to be just less the specter of regulation can temper a lot of growth. And I think the specter of that combined with some of the standards about how much hold we need to have will make the backdrop for the next few years very optimistic. I think from the bank's perspective, and I'm sorry for keep referencing the stock market, but if you look at the bank index the last month, the last quarter, it's gone up massively, which tells you that the backdrop is better.
Great. Andrew?
So with respect to manufacturing, I think that my threshold response is to say we need to appreciate the diversity of manufacturing as a concept. Many of us, when we first hear that word, we think of, an old line factory producing, washing machines or something like that. But of course, that's not what's really going on. But here in New Jersey, we have an incredibly diverse manufacturing sector. And so I think the policy prescriptions, whether they be property tax abatements, special incentives or credits for employment or investment based on manufacturing activity, they need to be tailored to different segments of the manufacturing sector. And that's a little bit above my pay grade because I don't profess to know a lot about how that is structured, but I think there's probably room for more of a scalpel rather than, the sort of the typical, frankly, tried, true, and now tired approach of saying, well, let's just, reduce the factor apportionment for manufacturing receipts or whatever it is. Some of that may be still relevant, but maybe it's time to look a little bit beyond that and to kind of focus in on a more, micro level for different elements of the sector.
Time for one more question. Right up front, Wayne, come. Yep.
Good morning. Jim Benton with Stevens and Lee. I was wondering if you gentlemen might address a concept, not in terms of out-migration, but in terms of seasonal out-migration that does occur right after the Christmas holiday season or the holiday season, New Year's, where we lose massive participation in our state's economy from those that go to Florida for 6 months and 1 day. Is there an opportunity for federal reform of that type of practice? We lose our golf clubs. We lose the participation in our regional economy. We lose grandmothers and grandfathers that transport themselves out of state. Is there an issue there, particularly given your experience, Andrew?
Well, there's certainly an issue there. I'm not sure, Jim, how I would address it through federal policy other than to say, if the cap on state and local tax deductibility is lifted, that would help reduce the tax-related incentive to become a non-resident taxpayer here in New Jersey. And I spoke a few moments ago about the rise of non-resident tax filing among that higher income cohort. That's a real thing. And this speaks to or hits at a larger problem, which is the whole conversation around migration typically, I think, is underinformed. There's this popular concept that some of us are arguing that if you raise taxes, people are going to, pack their bags and move lock, stock, and barrel to a place like Florida or Wyoming. That's not true. As you just pointed out, Jim, you can still be a property owner and spend quite a lot of time, most of the good weather months here in New Jersey, without being or remaining a tax domiciliary. And so that's the reality of it. So we're in a competitive space. Now, I don't think it's likely that the federal government will step in to somehow, interfere with the way each state determines its tax domicile rules. So I have to think on that a little bit.
I'm sure he's going to write a white paper on it tomorrow. Mark, anything you want to share?
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, it's really hard to legislate what people want to do. You can do it through tax policy. The SALT cap obviously was profound for a lot of people in this room and a lot of people in this country. And that's not, it was talked about whether it's going to change. I doubt it.
I do have one state level idea that I've kicked around for years. And my former staff pretty much laughed me out of the office on this one, but I'll share it with you anyway, because I'm no longer in public office and sort of being vulnerable. And that is, I thought, wouldn't it make sense? This is before the estate tax got repealed. We still have an inheritance tax here in New Jersey. But in any event, why not create a credit against the estate tax, or now the inheritance tax, that is equivalent to some amount of your final payments in gross income tax as a resident for the last 3 years of your life, right? So in other words, it would provide a small incentive, or maybe even significant in some cases, for people to remain in New Jersey and keep paying our gross income tax at the expense of losing a little bit of estate or inheritance tax. But if you look at the math, gross income tax is a much bigger deal than inheritance tax. So I first came up with this idea in relation to New York State. I didn't make any headway, but I'll offer it up to you today. Maybe that's something that we should get a buzz going on.
So I do want to say one slight bright spot in the Business Outlook survey where something was moving more to the positive was the question we ask each and every year: will you make New Jersey your domicile in retirement? Now, I have to tell you, we're not to a majority of people saying yes yet, but each year since the elimination of the estate tax, that number has moved to the more favorable, slow and steady there, right? Proudly, NJBIA led the fight on the elimination of the estate tax many years back, and we believed it would make a difference, and it is making a difference. Slow and steady. We have to try to chip away at inheritance tax because we know it's a really big deal, especially for family-run business. When your nephew is the next one to inherit the business, they can't do it when the uncle dies and they have to pay the inheritance tax. And it has to come out of the business, and then the business is pretty much done. We hear that story every day. So I want to finish on a positive note. I want to thank these amazing gentlemen for a really stimulating discussion. Thank you so much. You gave us a lot to think about, and appreciate you being here today, and safe travels back to California. Look, we can control tax policy. We can't control the weather. At least you get good weather with your tax policy, okay? Thank you. Let's have another round of applause.